not so nice piranhas who will eat you alive if you turn your back on them. And just looking at the budget today, I'm not even going to go into that, but there's been some nasty stuff going down. But on my way over to Tallahassee this last week, Wednesday, I was driving my usual 75 plus between Pasco County and Tallahassee. I found out from the head of the Joint Administrative Procedures Committee that he just got a letter from DOH. And I'm starting out in the middle because if I start out at the beginning, it's going to take forever. But let me just back up just a little bit here. Okay. 2016, we go ahead and vote 71% in favor of Amendment 2. And that automatically, everybody would think, is the end-all to end-all, and we are going to have our way. Bingo. Not so bingo. But the first thing that happened was, of course, when it was voted in, it became a constitutional amendment, and it became Article 10, Section 29 of the Florida Constitution. And one of the things it says in Article 10, Section 29, and the duties of the department, and by the way, the department in this case is the Department of Health, is what has been decided. The department shall issue reasonable regulations necessary for the implementation and enforcement of this section. So they gave the Department of Health the right to go ahead and write all the rules and regulations. Now, you've probably heard this last week about the fact that our sunny state has a sky falling on top of it, and everything is falling apart, and all the rules are gone. The Constitution gave the Department of Health the constitutional authority to write rules and regulations. And they had to write rules and regulations in regards to things like how the application process will occur for medical marijuana treatment centers, as they call them. I don't even like to use the word marijuana, but they did, so I have no choice. And the issuance of cards and things of that sort. And that is what they did. They went ahead and took their constitutional authority and wrote them any way they wanted to, because that's what you can when you have constitutional authority. And then came the legislature. Now, grant you, the reason that this thing was in there in the first place is because Mr. Morgan and Mr. Mills, who helped write Amendment 2, did not trust the legislature to do their job. So they made certain that they gave them constitutional authority to go ahead and write rules and regulations, so the legislator wouldn't have to. But the legislator did write rules and regulations, and in form of a bill called SB 8A, which you may have heard of, which created the whole framework on how this program was supposed to go forward. Very prohibitionist, a lot of problems with it. We're going to fix it next session, but in the meantime, this is what we have. And that was signed into law last June by our governor, and it became Florida statute. And that meant that the department had to go ahead and start writing rules and regulations in regards to that. But when you write rules and regulations in regards to a statute, you have to follow what is called, next page, the Administrative Procedures Act, which is Statute 120 in Title 10 of the Florida statutes. And you have to follow these rules and regulations very specifically, because these were made to make certain that all rules and regulations are fair and unbiased, and that can't be challenged. But in their infinite knowledge, infinite wisdom, and infinite laziness, the folks over at the Department of Health cut and pasted the rules and regulations they wrote with constitutional authority and stuck them into the Florida Administrative Register, which is where you put the new rules and regulations as they're proposed when they become emergency regulations, whatever. The only problem is those rules and regulations were written with constitutional authority. They didn't have any bearing on the fact that all these rules in Chapter 120 exist. And basically, they overstepped their authority in writing these. So there was a lot of problems with them. So the Joint Administrative Procedures Committee wrote Mr. Bax and company a letter, and starting in October, then another letter, then another letter, then another letter. When I went to the committee meeting prior to the session, which was in December, there were already a dozen letters from October 6th up until that time, none of which had been answered. I think it was 42 pages at the time, or 64 pages, and every page said, please explain why you did this, please advise what you're going to do about it. Point after point after point. I used to work for the DOH. If I got one of those letters with 5 points on it, my job would have been gone. But for some odd reason, after all these letters, they hadn't done anything, and they hadn't even responded to the Joint Administrative Procedures Committee. So they said, go ahead and fix this. We hope to see you soon. We're going to have another committee meeting, even though we usually don't do this during session, because usually it just reviews the rules that were written for last year's laws. And when it came time for February 5th, they had gotten a letter from the DOH saying that, no, we haven't responded to any of your letters. Yes, we know you already wrote 5 more letters, but we think that this whole thing you're doing is just slowing us down. So the DOH told the Joint Administrative Procedures Committee, who was in charge of what they do, we don't want you bothering us because you're slowing us down. Which, of course, insulted the heck out of them. And they asked them to come up 4 times to the podium to explain themselves, because they were objecting to 4 particular rules, one of which was the way that the medical marijuana treatment center application process is going. And they said, you need to fix this. You get 30 days. And the thing is, what really pissed them off that day was that each time they called Christian Bax to the podium, he sat in the back of the room, looking around, like he hadn't heard himself being called to the podium. 4 times I called him to the podium, and he just sat there, maybe playing a song in his head. I don't know what he was doing, but he sure as heck didn't acknowledge the people in front. Senator Rader, who is the chair of that committee, could not believe he would call somebody to the podium who would sit in the back of the room and not come up. At the end, Mr. Bax came up and gave a prepared speech which did not respond to those 18 letters appropriately. He just gave a status update report, essentially. So they said, you've got 30 days to fix this. Well, the 30th day was this last Wednesday. And I get a call from the coordinator. He said, we got the letter. I said, he said, it's the 30th day. You got the letter, finally. He said, everything else is set? He said, no. I said, why? He said, well, I looked it over. I said, give me about 2 days. I'm going to write the response. It's going to take a while to go ahead and explain everything they did wrong. But essentially, this letter is a non-response. What they're saying is, they first off said they're only responding to 3 out of the 18 letters. Secondly, their responses were unresponsive. I can tell you, just as a clue, the first line said, thanks to our agency, we now have 83,000 people who have legal medical access to cannabis in the state of Florida. Now, those people who've been following the numbers, you know that's an abject lie. Because we have 83,000 people in the registry. We only have 54,000 actual medical cards that have been issued. So the other 29,000, if they were accessing, they were accessing illegally. I guess with the blessings of the Department of Health. But just that beginning showed you that either they didn't remember which lie they had told earlier and they forgot what they had said earlier, or they just weren't prepared to actually put out a letter at the end of 30 days. I'm not surprised because they really hadn't met almost any deadline they'd ever come to. And so I asked around, and in fact, one of the experts involved in this is in this room. I don't think he wants to identify himself, so I'll keep it quiet. But he told me that what they've done is rather than fixing those rules that were objected to, those 4 rules, they fixed 1, and they repealed the other 3. Totally took them off the Florida Administrative Register, one of which was the one on how to apply for medical marijuana treatment center. And that is what caused the scare that all of a sudden we have no rules in place. There is no program. Everything is going to heck. We need to start buying as much water and bread as possible and hide in a hole. But the fact is, you remember that first rule they wrote with constitutional authority that they cut and pasted because they didn't have the time to actually do it right into the register? Those are still in force. Even though those other rules were repealed, the constitutional ones, like a redundancy, are still in place. And they're the ones that are active right now. So we still have a program in place. Now, how are we going to move forward? Well, Mr. Plant wrote a letter to the General Counsel of the DOH explaining that they had used undue authority in the way they wrote the rules, and they still have to fix them. And they were not supposed to repeal them. They were just supposed to fix them because they don't have the right to repeal them. When somebody asks you to fix something, you don't throw it out. You fix it. So that is where we stand at this point in time. There's going to be some more administrative meetings coming up. But the constitutional rules are still in place. And we go on from there. Now, I can tell you, some of these complaints the Administrative Procedures Committee had, they're pretty darn simple. You can tell it was cut and pasted because the old law that we started out with the Charlotte's Web Law and the Compassionate Care Act, it called the Office of Compassionate Use, right? And then they changed that to the Office of Medical Marijuana Use when the new bill came through. But the rules they wrote always called it the Office of Compassionate Use. because that's what it was before. They didn't bother to change it. Why bother? It would take so many times to have to look for it and we have to change it each time, right? And also, another thing they had to do with was that the word caregiver was exchanged for the word legal representative. And caregivers are not always legal representatives. You only have power of attorney. So that they said you've got to stop using that word legal representative and point out each and every time in all those rules, and there are quite a few of them, that they use the wrong terminology. So that's where it stood all the way from beginning to end. It was just strictly a rehash of what they'd done before. They didn't bother to take the time to do it right, and that is where we stand. But the good news is we still have the constitutional rules in place. We are going to get this thing fixed eventually. It would be nice if we could get Christian Bax out of office and remove that whole program that is messing things up. There was actually an amendment to a bill this last week that says from now on, the person who is the director of the Office of Medical Marijuana Use must be confirmed by the full Senate and not just be appointed by the governor. There's a reason for that. Mr. Christian Bax got his job because in the office of the governor is his sister, Miss Laura Bax, who happened to fix his resume and change it a bit so it looked like he had more experience. And he got that job with no competition and no questions. And, just so you know, his dad, who is now the director of communications, 80 years old guy, he used to be in charge of DCF. His name is James Bax. He, by the way, is in charge of a company called 5 Points, who happened to have written the software for the registry, which constantly goes down and screws up everything when doctors try to put new orders in it and things of that sort. So that little dynasty family was given this carte blanche thing from the governor. And they said, enough is enough. Senator Rader put that amendment out saying, we need somebody who we approve of, not who the governor just put in. That he was told to withdraw that amendment immediately. Part of it had to do with the fact that it was technical. The bill they're trying to attach it to, they weren't allowed to put any amendments on. So he didn't say anything about it the first day. The second day when that same bill came up for final vote, he just said, I can't take this anymore. He'd already read the letter from the commissioner of the JAPC and said, I've got to talk on this. And for 2 minutes, he rattled on about how terrible this all has been done and how we need to fix this in the future. So we have, coming up this next session, a lot more senators, a lot more representatives on our side to get this thing fixed because so many of them have been irked by the arrogance and laziness of the Office of Medical Marijuana Use that we didn't see any changes this last year, but we have a new speaker next year, a new president of the Senate, and a whole bunch of really, really pissed legislators who hopefully will be reelected, the ones who are here, and the senators who are here who are coming back, who will say, yes, we are willing to make changes. So now, this is where you guys come in. Because it's all well and good for me to go up there and pretend one-man army. It doesn't really work all that well. We need to come as a group of active citizens expressing our voice. It's not just enough, guys, to go ahead and post on Facebook that you're pissed about something. It might be good for you to rant for a while, maybe make you feel better that night, although it's so good indica. But the fact is, what we need is boots on the ground. And that means go to your local representative, go to his office, or write him a letter. Don't write him an email, write him an actual letter, because letters are written, that are written are read. Emails are usually ignored 80% of the time. Write him a letter and explain what you want to see this upcoming session. And if you can, come with me up to Tallahassee. So when we go to these various legislators' offices, I come back with a crowd behind me. People who are all of the same voice, so they know these guys are part of the 71%. These guys got more votes than any of you guys got behind them in regard to this bill. So we can coordinate and advocate and be active. We can fix this so this becomes not their program, but our program. Yes. and the way we want it to work for our upcoming businesses, for the health and welfare of our loved ones who take these products, and the future. We have to all be active. If you want to be in this business, great. But don't just think that being in the business is enough. Be active with the legislature. Carve the path that will allow you to walk forward. And that is the way things work. Thank you.
Mentioned if you wanted to write a letter, is there a place where people could go and find those little bullet point ideas?
Absolutely. In fact, I'm writing a couple of them. Yeah. Colette was asking about whether people would like to have some of those talking points, so when they make those letters, they can do that. Yeah, I will go be posting on my Facebook page, Gary Stein, also the page for the Great Green Hope, all the things that you should include and how you should write a respectful letter. Because there is an actual way to write a letter to a legislator so they pay more attention to it. Number one, you should always call them the Honorable. Whether they are or not, you have to call them the Honorable. And be respectful. Because you cannot come into a legislator's office that you want to make a change for you and rant and rave and spit and wail at them. A couple of years ago, there was this guy named Matt Hudson who was a very intelligent guy, was in charge of Ways and Means, so to speak. And I had an appointment with him, and the SEU 1199 were behind me in these big purple shorts. And I came in there, I sat down, and he said, "Are you with them?" I said, "I'm not wearing a purple shirt." He said, "Good, because they came in here and they were calling me every name under the sun." I said, "I'm sorry to hear that, sir. What did they want? What did they say?" I have the faintest idea. I didn't listen to a damn thing they said. All I heard was name calling, and I shut down. And that is what happens, guys. If you just shout epithets, and you can come in costume and things of that sort and do these crazy stunts at the legislators, they're not going to listen to you. Be respectful. Talk to them on their level. Tell them that I'm a human being, I'm one of your constituents, or I'm a person in the state, and I would like to see this happen for our state. And you can make it happen, and here's how you can do it. Can you help us? Ask for their help. Tell them the subject you want to talk about. Give them a little bit of information as to what they need to do. And give them a recommendation. I call it the SIR approach, sir, like you're being respectful. Tell them the subject, give them some information, and make a recommendation. Give them an ask. I mean, I have done this because a lot of times I can't get appointments with guys. I meet them in the elevators, I meet them in the hallways. With that approach, I can talk to them in about 60 seconds before they get to their destination, and I've made my point. So there are ways to do advocacy properly. Hopefully I will have advocacy classes in Tallahassee or elsewhere throughout the year, so you guys can all become great advocates and make the change you want to have.
What's your website?
Okay, right now I have a Facebook page, which is Gary J. Stein, which you can find. You're already connected on it. And also The Great Green Hope, which is my book page. You'll see it on both pages in regards to these kind of things, and we will move forward from here. And if there is a website that is more conglomerated, which I will probably do soon if I can catch my breath from sessions, we will have that too. But we have the time now to do now an interim session, which will probably start in January when things start getting going again. And also, there's a thing called legislative delegations that happen in each of your counties. That's when all the legislators for your county meet before session, and they ask everybody, what would you like to see this year? Feel free to come to those. And last year we published, Cannabis Coalition published the locations of all those legislative delegations so people could come and speak. Do that. If it's close to home, do that. Be part of that. And we'll make sure that you have all the information you need. Thank you.